Chapter 1. The Honeymoon from Hell. Mark Oberon stood at the balcony of their Santorini villa, holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a custom-designed constellation necklace, platinum and diamonds arranged to mirror the stars they'd gazed at on their first date. He traced the pattern with his finger, remembering how Tiffany had pointed out Orion's belt that night. "This is perfect," he murmured, picturing her reaction. The necklace had cost him a small fortune, but Tiffany deserved it. She'd brought such joy into his life over the past year. He thought back to their first meeting at the Chicago Architecture Foundation Gala. He'd been presenting his latest design when he noticed her in the audience, elegant in a black dress, hanging on his every word. After his presentation, she'd approached him with intelligent questions about his sustainable design philosophy. "Your work shows such vision," she'd said, her blue eyes sparkling. "Most architects just follow trends, but you're different." That night, they talked for hours on the rooftop terrace, sharing dreams and aspirations under the stars. Mark had never met someone who seemed to understand him so completely. Their whirlwind romance had been like a dream. Tiffany brought excitement and spontaneity into his structured world. When she suggested getting married after just 6 months, it had felt right. Now, on their honeymoon in Santorini, Mark couldn't believe his luck. The morning sun painted the whitewashed buildings in golden light as he watched Tiffany by the infinity pool below. She was on her phone, probably sharing photos with her friends, that tight-knit group of socialites she'd introduced him to. He'd never quite felt comfortable around them, but they were important to Tiffany. A memory flickered, Tiffany at lunch with those friends, their laughter cutting off abruptly when he'd approached. The strange look they'd exchanged. But he'd dismissed it then, too caught up in his happiness. "Mark." Tiffany's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a manila envelope. Something in her expression made him pause. "Everything okay?" he asked, quickly pocketing the velvet box. "We need to talk." Her voice was different, harder, colder than he'd ever heard it. She walked to the table and placed the envelope down. "I want a divorce." Mark stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "You heard me." She pushed the envelope toward him. "These are divorce papers. I've already signed them. This is a joke, right?" He looked for any sign of humor in her face but found none. "Tiffany, we just got married 3 days ago." She laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through him like a blade. "Oh, Mark." Sweet, naive Mark. "Did you really think someone like me would actually want to spend their life with someone like you? Someone like me?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "A boring architect who thinks sustainable design will change the world." She rolled her eyes. "God, do you know how hard it was pretending to care about your lectures on green buildings and social responsibility?" Mark's hands clenched into fists. "Then why?" $10,000, she interrupted, examining her manicured nails. "That's why. My friends bet me I couldn't get you to marry me within a year. They thought you were too smart, too careful." She smirked. "Guess they were wrong." The world seemed to freeze. Mark felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. The velvet box in his pocket felt like it was burning through his skin. $10,000, he repeated, his voice eerily calm. "That's what our relationship was worth to you." "Please," Tiffany scoffed. "There was never a relationship. It was all an act. The stargazing, the deep conversations, the connection we supposedly had. I researched you for weeks before that gala, learned everything about your interests, your passions. It wasn't hard to become your perfect woman." Mark thought of all the moments he treasured. Their first kiss, the night he proposed, their wedding day. All lies, carefully orchestrated for a bet. "Your friends," he said slowly. "They were in on this the whole time?" "Of course. Why do you think they kept inviting you to events?" "They wanted to watch the show." She gathered her bag. "Don't worry, I won't ask for anything in the divorce. The bet money is all I wanted, and I already have that." She headed for the door, then paused. "You know what the funny thing is? They said you were too good for me, too principled. They thought you'd see through me." She laughed again. "But love really does make people blind." Mark stood perfectly still, watching her walk away. The architect in him, the part that understood structure and foundation, recognized that something was being demolished inside him. But in its place, Something else was being built. Something harder, colder, more calculated. He pulled out the velvet box and opened it. The constellation necklace caught the light, each diamond twinkling like the stars that now felt like they were mocking him. With deliberate movements, he walked to the balcony and hurled the box as far as he could. He watched it disappear into the blue waters of the Aegean Sea. The next few days passed in a blur of rage and humiliation. Mark barely left the villa, subsisting on room service and the minibar. He couldn't bear to see the pitying looks from the hotel staff who'd witnessed Tiffany's dramatic departure. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from family and friends back home, asking about honeymoon photos. He ignored them all. How could he explain that his marriage had been nothing but an elaborate bet? That he'd been played for a fool? On the fourth night, unable to stand the confines of the villa any longer, Mark wandered into the narrow streets of Oia. The tourists had thinned out, replaced by locals closing up their shops and restaurants. The smell of grilled souvlaki and fresh bread wafted from a small taverna tucked away in a quiet corner. "You look like a man who needs food, not just ouzo," a voice called out. An older woman stood in the doorway, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes were kind but shrewd, taking in his disheveled appearance. Mark realized he couldn't remember his last proper meal. "I'm not hungry," he said, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. The woman, Eleni, according to the taverna's sign, laughed. "Your stomach disagrees. Come, sit. I have fresh moussaka and stories that will make your troubles seem lighter." Something about her no-nonsense manner broke through Mark's isolation. He found himself following her inside, settling at a small table in the corner. "I'm Eleni," she said, placing a generous plate of moussaka in front of him. "And you are a man whose heart has been broken." Mark looked up sharply. "Is it that obvious? I have owned this taverna for 40 years. I know heartbreak when I see it." She poured 2 glasses of ouzo. "But more importantly, I know survival." Over the next few hours, Eleni shared her story. How she'd lost everything in the financial crisis. Her savings, her larger restaurant in Athens, nearly this taverna too. How her husband had died, leaving her to face the creditors alone. "But you know what I learned," she said, refilling their glasses. "When everything is taken from you, you discover who you truly are. And sometimes who you are is stronger than who you were." Mark found himself telling her everything. The bet, the humiliation, the rage that threatened to consume him. "Ah," Eleni nodded. "You want revenge?" "No," Mark said, surprising himself. "Revenge implies equality. I want to destroy them. All of them." Eleni studied him for a long moment. "Then you must become someone new. Someone they won't recognize until it's too late." For the first time since Tiffany's revelation, Mark felt a spark of purpose. "How?" "First, you work. Hard work rebuilds the soul." She gestured around the taverna. "My kitchen needs cleaning. The patio needs painting. Do this, and I will teach you what I know about people. Their weaknesses, their desires, their lies." Mark looked at his soft hands and used to manual labor. "I'm an architect." "Good. Then you understand that before you can build something new, you must clear the ground of debris." She held his gaze. "The question is, are you ready to begin?" Mark drained his ouzo and stood. "Where's your mop?" Over the next week, Mark threw himself into physical labor. He scrubbed floors, repainted walls, fixed broken furniture. Each night, exhausted but clear-headed, he sat with Eleni, absorbing her lessons about human nature. "Your wife and her friends," Eleni said one evening, "they see people as things to be used. But they forget that things can be weapons." "How do you mean?" "Information, connections, money, status. These are their weapons. Learn to use them better than they do." She smiled grimly. "And never let them see your pain again. Pain is a weakness they will exploit." Mark nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. "They think they've written the end of my story. Then show them it was only the beginning." Eleni handed him a glass of ouzo. "But remember, revenge is like ouzo. Too much will poison you. The trick is to stay cold, stay focused." On his last night in Santorini, Mark sold the constellation necklace to a jeweler in Fyra. The money would fund his flight home and the first steps of his transformation. You're ready, Eleni said as they said goodbye. But promise me something. When the time comes, make them regret underestimating you. Mark hugged her fiercely. I promise. And thank you for everything. As his plane took off from Santorini, Mark watched the island disappear beneath the clouds. The man who'd arrived here 2 weeks ago, trusting, naive, easily manipulated, was gone. In his place was someone new, someone forged in betrayal and strengthened by rage. Tiffany and her friends thought they'd destroyed him. Instead, they'd created their own destruction. He would take everything they valued, status, wealth, reputation, and make them watch as he demolished it all. The game they'd started with a cruel bet would end with a lesson they'd never forget. Some people are too dangerous to betray. Chapter 2. Rebuilding from the Ashes. The Chicago skyline greeted Mark with its familiar steel and glass silhouette as his taxi approached downtown. His small apartment in River North felt foreign after the grandeur of Santorini, but it would serve his purposes. He needed a base of operations, somewhere to begin his transformation. His phone had died days ago, and he left it that way. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. Their reactions would tell him who to trust and who to eliminate from his life. The doorman, Miguel, did a double-take as Mark passed. Mr. Oberon? We weren't expecting you back so soon. And Mrs. Oberon? There is no Mrs. Oberon, Mark said coldly. And if anyone asks, you haven't seen me. Miguel's eyes widened, but he nodded. Good man. Mark made a mental note to ensure Miguel was taken care of when this was all over. Inside his apartment, Mark unpacked his luggage, separating items into 3 piles. Keep, donate, destroy. Anything associated with Tiffany went into the destroy pile. He didn't burn them. That would be melodramatic. Instead, he placed them in garbage bags and distributed them to different dumpsters across the city. No evidence, no weakness. His phone, when he finally charged it, exploded with notifications. Voicemails from his parents, texts from friends, emails from colleagues. He read them all but responded to none. Instead, he crafted a simple email to his firm. Taking 2 weeks of personal leave. Will return September 1st. All current projects are updated and timelines maintained. Mark Oberon. Professional. Controlled. No hint of the chaos Tiffany had unleashed. The responses came quickly. Concern from genuine colleagues, thinly veiled gossip from others. One email caught his attention, from Harrison Blake himself, the founder of their firm. Whatever happened in Greece, handle it. Then come see me. HB. Mark allowed himself a small smile. Harrison Blake wasn't known for taking personal interest in junior architects. This could be useful. The next 2 weeks were devoted to systematic reinvention. Mark hired a personal trainer who'd worked with Special Forces veterans. No gentle introduction to fitness. He wanted to be pushed to his limits and beyond. Most people quit after the first session. Jake, his trainer, said after watching Mark vomit into a trash can following their initial workout. Mark wiped his mouth and straightened. Again. Jake grinned. You're either crazy or determined. Both. While his body transformed through punishing workouts, Mark's mind stayed razor-sharp. He spent evenings analyzing his past interactions with Tiffany's social circle, identifying patterns, weaknesses, potential pressure points. Sandra Mitchell, the ringleader who'd likely orchestrated the bet. Old money, desperate to maintain status despite her family's dwindling fortune. Multiple divorces, each settlement smaller than the last. Rebecca Chin, the social climber. New money, eager to prove herself. Married to a tech entrepreneur, but running through his money faster than he could make it. James Porter, the trust fund playboy. Tiffany's occasional lover before Mark, though she didn't know Mark knew. Useful information for later. He documented everything in encrypted files on his laptop. Names, connections, secrets whispered at parties when they thought he wasn't listening. Eleni was right. Information was power. September 1st arrived with a heat wave. Mark dressed carefully for his return to work. Bespoke suit in charcoal gray, crisp white shirt, subtle platinum cufflinks. His new workout regime had filled out his shoulders, and the suit emphasized his transformed physique. The office fell silent as he strode through. Gone was the slightly rumpled architect who worked late hours and apologized for taking up space. This Mark Oberon moved with purpose, his presence demanding attention. "My office." "Now." Harrison Blake's voice cut through the whispers. Mark followed him into the corner office with its spectacular view of the Chicago River. Harrison Blake was a legend in architectural circles, brilliant, ruthless, and known for destroying competitors as efficiently as he designed buildings. He studied Mark for a long moment. "You look different. Everything is different. Tell me." So Mark did, laying out Tiffany's betrayal in clinical terms. No emotion, just facts. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tapped his desk, a tell Mark had noticed during client meetings. He was intrigued. "You know what fascinates me, Mark?" Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Not the betrayal. That's common enough in our circles. No, what fascinates me is your response. Most men would be broken. You seem enhanced. What doesn't kill you, right?" Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed." Harrison stood and walked to his wall of awards. "I have a project. Something special. The client is particular. Demands excellence, abhors weakness. I was going to give it to Stevens, but perhaps I want it." Harrison turned, eyebrows raised. "You don't even know what it is. Doesn't matter. I'll exceed expectations. Will you?" Harrison's gaze was piercing. "Even if I tell you it's the new Davenport Hotel project?" Mark's pulse jumped, but his expression remained neutral. Richard Davenport, billionaire developer, known for aggressive expansion and questionable ethics, also known for dating a certain type of woman. Especially then, Harrison smiled, a predator recognizing another of its kind. The old Mark Oberon would have run from this project. Too controversial, too morally ambiguous. The old Mark Oberon is dead. Good. Harrison handed him a thick file. "Don't make me regret this." Mark spent the next month immersing himself in the Davenport project. His designs were bold, innovative, pushing boundaries while remaining commercially viable. He worked late into the night, fueled by purpose rather than passion. His colleagues noticed the change. Gone were the friendly lunch invitations and casual conversations. Some whispered about his divorce, spreading rumors about what had happened in Santorini. The braver ones tried asking directly. "Listen, Mark." Sarah from the design team approached his desk one evening. "We're all worried about you. Whatever happened with Tiffany isn't your concern." Mark cut her off without looking up from his blueprints. "The only thing you need to worry about is meeting the project deadlines." Sarah stepped back, hurt flashing across her face. "We used to be friends." "Used to be." Mark finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Things change." The whispers increased after that, but Mark didn't care. Let them talk. Every rumor, concerned glance, awkward interaction was just confirmation that his transformation was working. His dedication to the Davenport project caught Harrison's attention. The older architect began inviting Mark to high-profile client meetings, introducing him to Chicago's power players. Mark absorbed everything. The subtle power plays, the unspoken alliances, the careful manipulation masked as negotiation. "You're a quick study," Harrison remarked after a particularly successful meeting. "Most architects your age still think talent is enough to succeed. And you don't." Harrison laughed. "Talent is the price of admission. Power is the game." He studied Mark thoughtfully. "You understand that now, don't you?" Mark nodded. Every interaction was a transaction. Every relationship could be leveraged. These were lessons Tiffany had taught him, though not in the way she'd intended. His transformation wasn't limited to the office. Mark hired an image consultant, refining his wardrobe and appearance. He joined the exclusive East Bank Club, where Chicago's elite networked between workouts. He took private lessons in wine tasting, art appreciation, and ballroom dancing, the social graces that marked old money. The cost was astronomical, but Mark didn't care. He'd sold his car, liquidated his savings, and taken out loans. Money was just another tool, and tools were meant to be used. One evening, as he was leaving the office, he overheard two junior architects talking in the stairwell. "Did you hear? Tiffany's already engaged to Richard Davenport." "No way. Wasn't she just married to Mark?" "Apparently it was all a scam. Some bet with her friends." Mark continued down the stairs, his footsteps silent. So Tiffany had found her next target. Richard Davenport, the very man whose hotel he was designing. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Chapter 3. The stage is set. Harrison's offer of partnership came on a Friday evening, after everyone else had left the office. Mark had just finished a presentation rehearsal for the Davenport Hotel project when Harrison called him in. "You've changed this firm," Harrison said without preamble. "Your designs are bringing in clients we couldn't reach before. Your approach to the Davenport project alone has doubled our projected revenue for the quarter." Mark waited, knowing there was more. "I'm offering you a partnership. Full voting rights, profit sharing, the works." Harrison pushed a document across his desk. "Effective immediately." "Why now?" "Because you're ready." Harrison stood, walking to the window. "And because the Davenport presentation is next week. Having you as a partner sends a message about our commitment to the project." Mark picked up the partnership agreement, scanning the terms. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect. "You know about Tiffany and Davenport?" It wasn't a question, but Harrison answered anyway. "Of course I know. Chicago's architectural world and real estate circles are intimately connected. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Mark said, signing the partnership agreement with a steady hand. "Yet." Harrison smiled approvingly. "The best revenge requires patience." He poured 2 glasses of scotch. To new partnerships. They clinked glasses, both men understanding that this was more than a business arrangement. Harrison was giving Mark the platform he needed for whatever came next. The partnership announcement sent shockwaves through Chicago's business community. At 30, Mark was the youngest partner in the firm's history. Invitations to exclusive events flooded in, charity galas, private club memberships, board position offers. Mark accepted them all strategically, building his presence in the circles where Tiffany and her friends moved. He never attended the same events as them, but made sure they heard about his success. The Davenport Hotel presentation was scheduled for a Monday morning. Mark arrived early, ensuring everything was perfect. His team had prepared an impressive array of architectural models, renderings, and sustainability reports. At precisely 9 a.m., Richard Davenport strode in, surrounded by his executives. And there, on his arm, was Tiffany. She froze when she saw Mark, her perfectly made-up face paling slightly. She clearly hadn't expected him to be here, hadn't recognized his name on the project documents. "Mr. Davenport," Mark stepped forward smoothly, extending his hand. "Mark Oberon, lead architect and partner at Blake & Associates." Richard shook his hand firmly, studying him with sharp eyes. "Oberon? Why does that name sound familiar?" "Perhaps from the Architectural Digest feature last month," Mark suggested mildly, knowing full well that wasn't it. "Shall we begin the presentation?" For the next hour, Mark commanded the room. His design was revolutionary, a perfect blend of luxury and sustainability, with innovative features that would set the hotel apart from its competitors. He watched Tiffany from his peripheral vision, noting how she shifted uncomfortably whenever he spoke. "Impressive," Richard said when Mark finished. "Very impressive. Though I have to ask, why did you choose to preserve the historic facade instead of demolishing it? Wouldn't starting fresh be easier?" "Some things are worth preserving, Mr. Davenport," Mark replied, his eyes briefly meeting Tiffany's. "They remind us of where we came from, what we've overcome. Besides," he smiled, "appearances can be deceiving. The real changes happen behind the facade." Richard laughed appreciatively. "I like how you think, Oberon. Let's discuss this further over dinner." "Tonight? I'd be honored." "Excellent. Tiffany, darling, you'll join us?" Tiffany's smile was strained. "Of course." As the group filed out, Mark caught Harrison watching him with something like pride. The older architect nodded once, understanding passing between them. The stage was set. All the pieces were in place. Mark thought of Eleni's words in Santorini. "Make them regret underestimating you." He would. But first, he had a dinner to prepare for. A dinner that would mark the beginning of Richard Davenport's downfall, though the man didn't know it yet. And Tiffany? She was about to learn that the man she betrayed wasn't the same one standing before her now. The naive architect who believed in love and trust was gone. replaced by someone who understood power and knew how to use it. The game she'd started with a cruel bet was about to become something much more dangerous. And this time, Mark would be the one making the rules. Chapter 4: Revelations and Manipulations. The crystal glasses clinked as Richard Davenport raised a toast at Le Colonial, Chicago's most exclusive French-Vietnamese restaurant. To new partnerships and visionary designs, Mark returned the gesture, noting how Tiffany's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. She'd barely touched her food, pushing premium seafood around her plate while trying to avoid his gaze. "Tell me, Oberon," Richard leaned forward, "where did you develop your architectural philosophy? Your approach to the hotel project is unlike anything I've seen." "Experience," Mark replied, taking a measured sip of wine. "Sometimes life teaches you that the most beautiful facades hide the most interesting secrets." Tiffany's fork clattered against her plate. Richard glanced at her, irritation flickering across his features. "Darling, are you feeling well? You've been unusually quiet." Tiffany forced a smile. "I just remembered that Mark and I have met before, at a charity gala." "Oh." Richard's interest sharpened. "You never mentioned that, didn't I?" Her laugh was brittle. "It was so brief, hardly worth mentioning." Mark set down his wine glass. "Actually, it was more than brief. Wasn't it, Tiffany?" The color drained from her face. Richard looked between them, his expression darkening. "What exactly am I missing here? Should I tell him, or would you prefer to?" Mark's voice was calm, almost gentle, the kind of gentleness that preceded destruction. Tiffany remained silent, her knuckles white around her water glass. "Mr. Davenport," Mark turned to Richard, "Tiffany and I were married. Briefly. Our honeymoon in Santorini ended rather abruptly when she served me divorce papers and informed me our entire relationship had been part of a bet with her friends." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade away. Richard's face remained impassive, but his eyes blazed. "A bet. $10,000, Mark confirmed. Apparently, her friends didn't think she could convince me to marry her within a year. They underestimated her acting abilities." "Richard, I can explain," Tiffany began. "Not here." Richard's voice cut like steel. He signaled for the check. "Mr. Oberon, I apologize for this unexpected revelation. Perhaps we should reschedule our business discussion." "Of course." Mark stood, straightening his suit jacket. "Though I hope this personal matter won't affect our professional relationship. My team has invested considerable time in the hotel project." "It won't," Richard assured him, his grip on Tiffany's arm visibly tight as they prepared to leave. "I appreciate honesty, Mr. Oberon. Something others would do well to learn." As they left, Mark caught Tiffany's pleading look. He responded with a slight nod, as if acknowledging her silent request for mercy. Let her think she still had a chance to salvage this situation. The next morning, Harrison was waiting in Mark's office. "I heard about dinner," he said without preamble. "Bold move, revealing your history with Tiffany so directly. Sometimes the truth is the deadliest weapon." Mark pulled up the latest hotel designs on his computer. Richard Davenport values control above all else. Learning his fiancée has a history of deception? That's something he can't control. Harrison nodded approvingly. "He's launched an investigation into her past. My sources say he's hired Blackwood Securities, the same firm that handles his corporate investigations." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. You knew he would." "I counted on it." Mark turned his monitor, showing Harrison a series of documents. "Everything they'll find has been carefully curated. The bet, the divorce, the speed with which she moved on. It all paints a very specific picture of a gold digger who can't be trusted." Harrison studied the documents. "But something tells me there's more to your plan." Mark's smile was razor-sharp. "Richard's not the only one with investigators. Did you know he's been using the hotel project to launder money from his less legitimate ventures?" Harrison's eyes widened slightly. "That's a dangerous game you're playing." "No," Mark corrected him. "It's a dangerous game he's playing. I'm just making sure the right people notice." Over the next few weeks, Mark watched his plan unfold through carefully placed sources. Richard's investigation revealed not just Tiffany's betrayal of Mark, but a pattern of similar behavior throughout her social circle. The infamous bet was just one of many cruel games she and her friends had played with people's lives. Richard's rage manifested in subtle ways. Business meetings became tenser, his demands more exacting. He scrutinized Tiffany's expenses, questioned her whereabouts, restricted her access to his social circles. Tiffany, desperate to salvage her position, tried to approach Mark after a project meeting. "Please," she caught his arm in the parking garage. "You have to help me." Richard's become paranoid. "He's freezing me out of everything." Mark looked at her hand on his arm until she removed it. Paranoid? Or just finally seeing clearly? "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "What I did was cruel and stupid. But I've changed. I love Richard, truly." "Like you loved me?" Mark's voice remained neutral. "Tell me, does he know about James Porter?" She paled. "How did you?" "I know everything, Tiffany. Your affair with James before me, the other bets you and your friends made, the offshore account where you've been hiding Richard's gifts in case things go wrong." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I know about the pills in your purse that aren't prescribed to you, and the shopping trips that don't match your credit card statements. You've been investigating me?" Her shock seemed genuine. "Considerate returns on your $10,000 investment." He checked his watch. "You should go. Richard's security team does hourly sweeps of the garage. Wouldn't want them reporting this conversation to him, would you?" She backed away, her heels clicking on the concrete. "You're not the same person." "No," he agreed. "I'm not. You made sure of that." After she left, Mark made a call. "Did you get it?" "Yes, sir. Cassandra, Richard's personal assistant, confirmed. The security footage of your conversation is clear. Mr. Davenport will see it during his evening briefing." "Good. And the other matter?" "The documents you requested about the land deal are in your private email." "It's worse than we thought. The environmental violations alone are exactly what we need." Mark ended the call, satisfaction coursing through him. Cassandra had proved to be an unexpected ally. Richard's affair with her had left her bitter and afraid, looking for a way out. Mark's offer of protection and a new start had secured her loyalty. That evening, he received a text from Harrison. Richard saw the garage footage. "He's called an emergency meeting with his lawyers tomorrow." Mark allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Richard would be focusing on Tiffany now, scrutinizing her every move, seeing betrayal in her every action. The pressure would make her desperate, prone to mistakes. And Richard himself? His growing paranoia would affect his business decisions. He'd become aggressive, reckless, eager to prove he was still in control. Meanwhile, the evidence of his illegal activities was being carefully assembled. Environmental violations, money laundering, corrupt land deals, all documented and ready to be revealed at the perfect moment. "You were right," he typed back to Harrison. "Revenge does require patience." The message lit up his phone screen as he gazed out over the Chicago skyline from his office. Below, the city moved in its usual rhythms, unaware of the machinations playing out in its glittering towers. Mark thought of Eleni's words about revenge being like ouzo, potentially poisonous if not handled carefully. But he wasn't drinking it. He was serving it, one carefully measured dose at a time. Chapter 5. Turning the Screws. The pressure began to show in subtle ways. Richard's temper flared during project meetings, his usual smooth demeanor cracking under the weight of suspicion. Tiffany's attempts to maintain her social standing grew increasingly desperate as rumors of her past spread through Chicago's elite circles. Mark observed it all from his newly renovated office, now befitting a partner at Blake & Associates. He'd positioned his desk to face the door, a power play Harrison had taught him. It meant visitors had to cross the expanse of the room under his gaze. Cassandra sat across from him, her usual professional demeanor showing signs of strain. "He's becoming unstable. Yesterday, he threw a crystal decanter at the wall during a board meeting. Because of Tiffany?" She tried to access his private banking records. The security team caught it. Cassandra handed him a USB drive. "But while everyone was focused on that, I got what you needed. The full documentation of the River Northland deal." Mark plugged the drive into his laptop, scanning the documents. The evidence was damning. Richard had knowingly purchased contaminated land, falsified environmental reports, and bribed officials to fast-track permits. "You understand what this means?" he asked Cassandra. "Once this goes public, Richard will know you were involved." She lifted her chin. "I know. Is everything arranged?" "New identity, job in Seattle, apartment lease signed." He slid an envelope across the desk. "Your flight leaves tonight." Once the story breaks, Richard will be too busy saving himself to look for you. "Thank you." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "He deserves this, you know. The way he treats people, uses them. Like chess pieces," Mark agreed. "But sometimes pawns can take down a king." After she left, Mark reviewed the plan. The evidence would go to Julia Chun, a hungry young investigative reporter he'd cultivated a relationship with. She'd break the story, earning her career-making headlines while remaining unaware of his involvement. His phone buzzed. A text from Tiffany. "Need to talk. Please." About Richard's land deals. So she knew. Interesting. Mark forwarded the message to Harrison, who responded immediately. "She's desperate. Use it." The meeting was set for a quiet bar in Lincoln Park, far from their usual social circles. Tiffany arrived looking disheveled by her standards, clothes slightly wrinkled, makeup not quite perfect. "Richard's going to destroy everything," she said without preamble. "The hotel project, the land deals. There are things you don't know." "I know everything." Mark's voice was soft but carried clearly. "The contaminated soil reports, the bribes, the shell companies. The question is, what do you plan to do about it?" "Me?" She laughed hysterically. "What can I do? He's watching my every move. He's frozen my accounts, hired people to follow me. He thinks I'm gathering evidence against him." "Aren't you?" She stared at him, realization dawning. "This was your plan all along? Getting the hotel project, making him suspicious of me. You're going to destroy him?" "No, Tiffany. You are." "What?" Mark leaned forward. "Think about it. When this breaks, you'll be the perfect whistleblower. The concerned fiancé who discovered his crimes and bravely came forward. The media will love it. Richard will be ruined, but you'll emerge as the hero. Unless he reveals my past first." "He won't. Because right now, you're going to call Julia Chin at the Tribune and arrange a meeting. You'll provide her with evidence of Richard's crimes, evidence that mysteriously appeared in your email. And if I refuse?" Mark smiled. "Then the story still breaks, but with a different angle. One involving your knowledge and complicity in Richard's schemes. Those offshore accounts you thought were secret? They tell an interesting story." Tiffany's hands shook as she reached for her wine glass. "You've thought of everything. I learned from the best." He stood, dropping cash on the table. "You taught me how to play games, remember? $10,000 worth of lessons." The next day, Julia Chin's explosive exposé hit the front page. Real estate mogul's empire built on toxic foundation. Whistleblower fiancé reveals all. The fallout was immediate. Richard's office was raided by federal agents. His investors fled en masse. The hotel project was suspended pending investigation. Mark watched the chaos unfold from his office, Harrison at his side. "Magnificent," Harrison said, reading the article. "Tiffany comes off as the reluctant hero, Richard as the corrupt villain, and you're nowhere to be seen. The best moves are the ones no one sees coming. And your next move?" Mark's phone buzzed. Richard Davenport's private number. "That would be it now." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Careful. Wounded animals are the most dangerous." "Good thing I'm wearing armor." Mark answered the phone. "Mr. Davenport, I assume this is about the hotel project?" Richard's voice was chillingly calm. "You engineered this. All of it. That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof?" "I will find it. And when I do..." "You'll what?" Mark's voice hardened. "Reveal that your fiancé's ex-husband outsmarted you? That would make an interesting addition to tomorrow's headlines." Silence crackled over the line. "Then, what do you want?" "Originally, revenge. But now?" Mark examined his reflection in the window. "Now I want to watch you try to save yourself. It should be educational." He ended the call, turning to Harrison. "How long before his private investigator discovers my youthful indiscretion?" The marijuana possession charge from college? Soon. He's desperate for leverage. Good. Mark sat behind his desk. Let him think he's found a weakness. It'll keep him distracted from what's coming next. You're enjoying this, Harrison observed. Shouldn't I? They taught me well. Tiffany, her friends, this whole corrupt circle. They showed me how the game is played. Mark's expression was one of cold satisfaction. They just didn't expect me to become a better player than them. Chapter 6. Shifting Alliances and Escalation. The Chicago Tribune's ongoing coverage of the Davenport scandal dominated the city's attention. Each day brought new revelations, new accusations, new players in the drama. Mark monitored it all from the shadows, watching as his carefully laid plans rippled through Chicago's elite circles. The socialites who had once mocked him now whispered his name with a mixture of fear and respect, though none could prove his involvement. Richard's retaliation came swiftly but clumsily. His private investigator, desperate for dirt, leaked Mark's college marijuana charge to the press. The story barely made a ripple. One youthful indiscretion was nothing compared to environmental crimes and corruption. Amateur move, Harrison commented, dropping the morning paper on Mark's desk. He's losing his touch. Fear does that to people. Mark scanned the article. Though I am impressed they found the charge. I thought I'd buried it deeper. Speaking of buried things, Harrison settled into a chair. Your old friend Eleni is in town. Mark's head snapped up. What? Arrived this morning. She's staying at the peninsula. Harrison studied him carefully. Did you arrange this?
No.
Mark stood, straightening his tie. She's here on her own. The peninsula's lobby was a study in understated luxury. Eleni sat in a plush armchair, looking exactly as she had in Santorini, though her simple clothes stood out among the clad guests. You've been busy, she said as he approached. You shouldn't be here. Mark sat across from her. It's not safe. Safe. She laughed. You think Richard Davenport scares me? I survived the collapse of Greece's economy. I watched my husband die fighting corruption. Your little war here? It's a children's game. Why did you come? To remind you of your promise. Her eyes bore into his. You said you would make them regret underestimating you. But revenge without purpose is just destruction. I have a purpose. Do you? Or are you just proving you can play their game better than they can? She leaned forward. The Mark Oberon I met in Santorini wanted justice. What do you want now? Mark's fingers tapped against the armrest. I want them to understand consequences. Richard, Tiffany, all of them. They treat people's lives like toys. Break them, discard them, move on to the next. Someone needs to stop them. And that someone is you? Eleni's voice carried a hint of challenge. Be careful, Mark. The line between justice and vengeance is thin. I crossed that line the moment Tiffany handed me those divorce papers. He stood, offering Eleni his arm. Let me show you what I've built. They spent the afternoon touring Chicago, Mark pointing out his architectural projects, explaining his rise through the firm. Eleni listened silently, her expression growing more concerned. You've gained power, she finally said as they watched the sunset from the signature room. But power without wisdom is dangerous. I learned wisdom in your taverna. Did you? Or did you learn strategy? She touched his hand. There's a difference. Their conversation was interrupted by Mark's phone buzzing. Harrison's number? Excuse me, he said to Eleni, stepping away. What is it? Richard's making moves. Harrison's voice was urgent. He's hired Blackstone Securities, military contractors. Professional muscle. Mark's jaw tightened. He's getting desperate. Desperate enough to be dangerous. My sources say he's looking for anything he can use against you. Old relationships, financial records, family connections. Let him look. Mark glanced at Eleni, who was studying the city below. But increase security at the office. And get protection for our key people. Already done. But Mark, be careful. This isn't just business anymore. After ending the call, Mark rejoined Eleni. You should return to Greece. Things here might get complicated. I'm not leaving until I'm sure you remember who you are. She gripped his arm. The man who helped rebuild my taverna, who found strength in honest work. He's still in there somewhere. That man was weak. That man was strong enough to survive betrayal without losing his soul. She released him. But perhaps you're right. I should return home. My taverna needs me. As they parted in the hotel lobby, Eleni pressed something into his hand. A small worry bead, like the ones old men used in Greek cafes. To remind you of choices, she said. There's always another way. Mark watched her leave, the bead warm in his palm. But before he could reflect on her words, his phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Riverwalk. Midnight. Information about Richard you need to hear. He recognized the number's pattern, one of Richard's burner phones. A trap, obviously, but perhaps one he could turn to his advantage. The Riverwalk was deserted at midnight, Chicago's usual bustle replaced by an eerie quiet. Mark approached the meeting point carefully, senses alert for any sign of ambush. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Richard, but James Porter, Tiffany's former lover. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. This better be good, James, Mark said quietly. Richard knows about you and Harrison. James blurted out. He knows you've been gathering evidence, building a case. He's planning something big, something permanent. Why are you telling me this? Because Tiffany, James swallowed hard. She's in over her head. Richard's keeping her prisoner in their penthouse. He thinks she's still hiding evidence. Mark studied him. You still love her. Someone has to. James ran a shaking hand through his hair. Look, I know what she did to you is cruel. But Richard, he's not just corrupt, he's dangerous. The things I've heard. Go home, James. Mark's voice was cold. Forget this conversation happened. And if Richard asks, tell him his trap failed. As James hurried away, Mark pulled out his phone. Harrison? I need everything we have on James Porter. And get me Cassandra. We need to accelerate the timeline. The next few days were a blur of strategic moves and countermoves. Richard's security team became more visible, a clear attempt at intimidation. Mark responded by leaking more evidence to the press, keeping Richard off balance. The socialites who had participated in Tiffany's cruel bet began to face consequences. Anonymous tips to their husbands about hidden accounts and secret affairs. Business deals that mysteriously fell through. Social invitations that stopped arriving. They're running scared, Harrison reported during their evening strategy session. Sandra Mitchell's husband filed for divorce this morning. Rebecca Chin's tech startup lost its major investors. Good. Mark examined the worry bead Eleni had given him, rolling it between his fingers. And Richard's security team? Still watching, but they're professional enough to keep their distance. They're waiting for orders. Orders that won't come. Mark smiled slightly. Richard's too busy trying to save his empire. The FBI's forensic accountants are finding new evidence every day. Speaking of evidence, Harrison slid a file across the desk. Cassandra came through. These documents prove Richard knew about the contamination before buying the land. He deliberately falsified reports, endangered public safety. Perfect. Mark pocketed the worry bead. Send copies to our friends at the Tribune. And Harrison? Make sure Cassandra's new identity is solid. She'll need it soon. The pieces were falling into place. Richard's empire was crumbling. Tiffany's social circle was in chaos, and Mark's position was stronger than ever. But Eleni's words echoed in his mind. The line between justice and vengeance is thin. He touched the worry bead in his pocket. Perhaps she was right about choices. But he'd made his choice the moment Tiffany betrayed him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring that people like Richard and Tiffany couldn't hurt others the way they'd hurt him. The game was approaching its endgame. Richard was cornered, dangerous but weakening. Tiffany was isolated, her social status in ruins. And Mark? He was exactly where he needed to be, watching it all unfold according to his plan. Act 2 had set the stage for the final confrontation. The pieces were in position, the traps were set, and Mark was ready for whatever came next. But as he looked out over the Chicago skyline, Eleni's words continued to haunt him. Power without wisdom is dangerous. He would prove her wrong. He would show her that sometimes wisdom meant having the strength to see justice done, no matter the cost. The Mark Oberon who had helped rebuild her taverna wasn't gone. He had evolved into someone stronger, someone capable of ensuring that people like Richard and Tiffany could never harm others again. The game of revenge was nearing its conclusion, but the real test was still to come. How far would Mark go to see justice done? And what would that justice cost him in the end? Chapter 7. The Price of Revenge. Mark sat in his office at Blake & Associates, examining the document Richard's private investigator had unearthed. His college marijuana charge seemed trivial compared to Richard's crimes, but the investigator had dug deeper, uncovering something Mark had buried years ago. During his second year of architecture school, he'd altered building safety reports for a professor's private project. The professor had promised him an internship, and Mark, young, ambitious, and naive, had agreed. The building had never collapsed. No one had been hurt, but the evidence was there. If this got out, his career would be over. The irony wasn't lost on him. He destroyed Richard using similar evidence. Harrison entered without knocking, his expression grim. Richard's making his move. He's offered to trade his silence about your past for immunity in the federal investigation. He's desperate, Mark replied, his voice steady. The FBI won't deal. No, but he's sent copies of the evidence to the licensing board. If they launch an investigation, they won't. Mark stood, straightening his tie. Because we're going to give them something bigger to investigate. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Julia? I have another story for you. Bigger than Davenport. Meet me at the usual place. The Tribune Star reporter was already waiting when Mark arrived at their usual coffee shop. Julia Chun had built her career on the Davenport scandal, and her hunger for another big story showed in her eager expression. What have you got for me? She asked as Mark sat down. How would you like to expose corruption in the Architecture Licensing Board? Julia's eyes lit up. I'm listening. 3 board members have been accepting bribes to fast-track approvals. I have proof, bank records, emails, recorded conversations. He slid a USB drive across the table. They're the ones who approved Richard's contaminated land development. This is huge. Julia examined the drive. But why give it to me now? Because it's the right thing to do. He met her gaze steadily. Sometimes justice means sacrificing your own interests for the greater good. After Julia left, Mark received a text from Cassandra. Richard's threatening to expose everything. Not just your past. He knows about Harrison's involvement, my role, everything. Mark's fingers tightened around his phone. Richard was playing his final card, trying to take everyone down with him. A lesser man might have backed down, accepted a deal to save himself. But Mark wasn't that man anymore. He called Harrison. Implement Protocol 0. Are you sure? Harrison's voice was cautious. Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard wants to play hardball? Let's show him how it's done. Protocol 0 was their nuclear option. A complete data dump of Richard's crimes, not just to the media but to federal agencies, international watchdogs, and Richard's own board of directors. Every illegal deal, bribe, threat he'd ever made. But it would also expose their own role in gathering the evidence. Harrison's firm would face scrutiny. Mark's methods would be questioned. Careers would end. Mark thought of Eleni's worry bead, still in his pocket. She'd warned him about the price of revenge. But some prices were worth paying. His phone buzzed. A text from Tiffany. Please stop this. Richard's going to destroy you. He replied with a single word. Good. Let Richard try. Let him expose everything. Mark had built his revenge on a foundation of truth, while Richard's empire was built on lies. In the end, that would make all the difference. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. James Porter stood there, looking worse than he had at the Riverwalk. You need to help her, James said without preamble. Richard's lost it. He's threatening to reveal everything about Tiffany's past, destroy her completely. That was always the plan, Mark replied coldly. No, you don't understand. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. He has proof that she was involved in worse things than that bet. Things that could send her to prison. Why should I care? Because you're not like them. James's voice cracked. The Mark Oberon I knew is dead. Mark stood, his presence filling the room. Your precious Tiffany killed him in Santorini. The man standing before you? He's someone else entirely. James backed away. What happened to you? I learned. I evolved. I became what they made me. Mark's smile was razor-sharp. Now get out and tell Tiffany to prepare herself. The worst is yet to come. After James left, Mark pulled out Eleni's worry bead. The smooth stone felt warm in his palm, a reminder of simpler days in Santorini. Days of honest work and clear purpose. His phone buzzed again. Harrison? The FBI's moving in. They're raiding Richard's offices right now. And our contingency plans? In place. Cassandra's safely away. All traces of her involvement erased. The offshore accounts are clean. Good. Mark rolled the worry bead between his fingers. In the licensing board investigation? Julia's story runs tomorrow. It'll overshadow anything Richard tries to reveal about your past. Mark nodded, though Harrison couldn't see it. Everything was proceeding according to plan. So why did Eleni's words keep echoing in his mind? The answer came in the form of a letter delivered to his office the next morning. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Tiffany's. I know what you're doing, she'd written. And you're right. I deserve it. We all do. But before you finish this, remember who you were. That person had integrity, compassion, strength. Don't let our cruelty turn you into something worse than us. Mark crumpled the letter, but couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Instead, he tucked it into his desk drawer, next to the worry bead. The next few hours would determine everything. Richard would make his final move. The FBI would act on their evidence. Julia's story would break. And Mark had to decide what kind of victory he really wanted. Harrison found him at his desk late that night, staring at the city lights. The board's meeting tomorrow, Harrison said. They'll vote to remove Richard and freeze his assets. It's over. Not quite. Mark turned to face his mentor. There's still the matter of our involvement. Harrison raised an eyebrow. We could make a deal. Trade our evidence for immunity. No. Mark's voice was firm. No more deals. No more shadows. Whatever happens, we face it head on. That's surprisingly principled. Surprising to you, maybe? Mark stood. But there's someone in Greece who would understand completely. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The Chicago Tribune's headline screamed across the city. Architectural Licensing Board scandal exposed. Corruption at highest levels. Julia Chin's story was masterful, laying out a complex web of bribes, falsified reports, and endangered lives. Richard Davenport featured prominently, but he wasn't the only one. The corruption went deeper, higher, infecting the very institutions meant to protect public safety. Mark read the article in his office, aware that his own name would soon be drawn into the scandal, not as a villain, but as someone who had compromised his principles early in his career. The revelation would cost him, but it would give his evidence against Richard more weight. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. FBI wants to talk. Now. He'd been expecting this. The federal investigation into Richard had expanded, uncovering connections that led straight to Mark and Harrison's firm. Their methods in gathering evidence would be questioned, their motives examined. The FBI field office was a stark contrast to his luxurious office. 2 agents waited in an interrogation room, one older, one younger, both radiating contained energy. Mr. Oberon, the older agent began. We have some questions about your involvement in the Davenport investigation. Of course. Mark sat calmly. But first, I have something for you. He placed a thick file on the table. Complete records of my involvement in gathering evidence against Richard Davenport, including my own past indiscretions. The agents exchanged glances. This wasn't the response they'd expected. You're confessing? I'm telling the truth. All of it. My history with Tiffany, my early mistake with the building reports, how I gathered evidence against Richard. You'll find it's all there. The younger agent opened the file. Why give us this? Because the truth matters more than revenge. Mark met their gaze steadily. Richard Davenport endangered lives for profit. That truth shouldn't be tainted by questions about how we uncovered it. The interrogation lasted hours. Mark answered every question directly, hiding nothing. He explained how they'd gathered evidence, who had helped them, what methods they'd used. You understand this could end your career? The older agent asked. Some things are worth sacrificing. When he emerged from the FBI office, Harrison was waiting in his car. Well, it's done. Mark settled into the passenger seat. I told them everything. Everything? Everything about me. Nothing about you or the firm. Mark turned to his mentor. You don't deserve to go down for my revenge. Harrison's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The firm will protect you.
No.
Mark's voice was firm. I made my choices. I'll face the consequences. His phone buzzed. Tiffany. Richard's been arrested. They found more evidence in his private safe. I know. Mark's voice gave nothing away. You planned this, didn't you? All of it. The licensing board investigation, the FBI raids, everything. You taught me well, Tiffany. You and your friends showed me exactly how to destroy someone. She was quiet for a moment. I'm testifying against him. About everything. The land deals, the bribes, the threats. Good. I'm not doing it for immunity, she added quickly. I'm doing it because it's right. Because someone needs to stop him. Mark thought of Eleni's words about choices and consequences. People like Richard only stop when someone stands up to them. People like me, you mean? Her voice cracked. I know what I am, Mark. What I've done. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. Because you'll never have it. He ended the call, turning to Harrison. Take me to the Tribune. Julia Chun was surprised to see him in her office. I didn't expect you today. I want to make a statement. About my role in all this. She leaned forward, recorder ready. Why now? Because the story isn't over. It's not just about Richard or corruption or revenge. It's about choices. About becoming the kind of person who stands up to corruption, even when it costs you everything. You're going to admit your involvement? I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. The story ran the next day. Mark Oberon, successful architect and partner at Blake & Associates, admitting his own past mistakes while exposing deeper corruption. The public response was mixed. Some called him a hero, others questioned his methods. The licensing board launched an investigation into his early career. His partnership at the firm was suspended pending review. But Mark faced it all with the same cold determination that had driven his revenge. Richard's arrest made national news. Federal agents led him out of his office in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. Tiffany's testimony proved devastating, revealing years of corruption and manipulation. The socialites who had participated in her cruel bet faced their own reckonings. Sandra Mitchell's divorce exposed her role in multiple schemes. Rebecca Chin's tech company collapsed under scrutiny. Their carefully constructed world of privilege and cruelty imploded. Mark watched it all from the sidelines, Eleni's worry bead in his pocket. The price of justice had been high, but some prices were worth paying. Chapter 9. Finding Peace. The Greek islands looked different in winter. The tourists were gone, leaving Santorini to its permanent residents. Eleni's taverna glowed warmly in the twilight as Mark approached. She was waiting for him, as if she'd known he would come. So, it's finished?
Yes.
He sat at his old table, the one where she'd first taught him about survival. Richard's in prison. Tiffany's testimony ensured that. And you? She poured him a glass of ouzo. What did your revenge cost you? My partnership. My reputation, for a while. But not my integrity. He touched the worry bead. You were right about choices. And now? What will you do? Mark pulled out a set of blueprints. I'm starting over. My own firm, focusing on sustainable, community-oriented projects. Using architecture to build something good. Eleni examined the plans. These look like spaces for people, not profits. That's the idea. He spread out more drawings. Affordable housing, community centers, spaces that bring people together instead of keeping them apart. Like my taverna. Exactly like your taverna. He smiled. Places where people can rebuild themselves. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A woman entered, tall, professional, with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Mark. She looked around the taverna. I'm Olivia Chon, Julia's sister? She told me I might find you here. Ah, the environmental lawyer. Eleni's eyes twinkled. Come, sit. We were just discussing rebuilding. Olivia joined them, her interest caught by the blueprints. These are incredible. The integration of green spaces, the community focus. They're just plans right now, Mark said. I need someone who understands environmental law to help make them reality. Someone like me? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Someone exactly like you. Eleni watched their interaction with satisfaction. Sometimes, she said softly, destruction leads to creation. But only if we choose to build something better from the ashes. Mark touched the worry bead one last time, then placed it on the table. Keep it, he told Eleni. I don't need it anymore. No, she agreed, watching him and Olivia discuss sustainable building practices. I don't think you do. The taverna filled with locals as night fell, the same way it had when Mark first arrived, broken and seeking revenge. But now he sat with Olivia, sharing ideas about community development and environmental protection, while Eleni watched over them like a proud mother. His phone buzzed, a news alert. Richard's sentencing was complete. 20 years for environmental crimes, fraud, and corruption. Tiffany's testimony had earned her immunity, but her social standing was destroyed. She'd left Chicago, seeking her own fresh start. Mark switched off his phone. Those chapters were closed. His revenge had served its purpose, teaching him not just about power and consequences, but about the choice to use that power for something greater than destruction. As he listened to Olivia's passionate arguments for sustainable development, watched Eleni serve her regulars with tough love and wisdom, Mark understood something fundamental. The man who had helped rebuild this taverna hadn't died in Santorini. He'd been transformed, like steel and fire, becoming stronger without losing his essential nature. The game of revenge was over. The game of rebuilding, of creating something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, was just beginning. And this time, Mark knew exactly who he was and what he was building towards. The end wasn't marked by triumph or destruction, but by the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had chosen his own path. Not the path of naive trust that had led to betrayal, nor the path of pure vengeance that had almost consumed him, but something else entirely, a path of strength tempered by wisdom, of power guided by purpose. Eleni summed it up best as she closed the taverna that night. Some people get revenge, wise people get justice. But the wisest? They build something new from the ruins of the old. Mark looked at his blueprints, at Olivia's enthusiastic notes, at the warm community gathered in this small Greek taverna. He had built his revenge perfectly, bringing down those who had wronged him. But now he would build something even better, a legacy of positive change, a monument not to destruction but to renewal. The game was truly over. And in the end, Mark had won something far more valuable than revenge. He had won his future. Epilogue. 10 years later, the Chicago skyline had changed in the decades since the Davenport scandal. New buildings pierced the clouds, each telling its own story of ambition and vision. Among them stood the Oberon Community Center, its innovative design combining sustainable architecture with social purpose. Mark Oberon studied the building from his office in the Oberon and Chan Sustainable Design Group headquarters. At 40, his features had matured, success and purpose evident in his bearing. The young architect who had once been betrayed in Santorini seemed like a character from someone else's story. The Singapore contract arrived, Olivia said, entering his office with a stack of documents. Now his wife of 7 years, she had transformed from environmental lawyer to co-CEO of their architectural empire. They want us to design their new eco-city district. Mark smiled, remembering how their partnership had begun in Eleni's taverna. Their shared vision of sustainable, community-focused architecture had grown into something revolutionary. The firm now had offices in 5 countries, each project combining environmental responsibility with social impact. Have you seen the latest piece about Richard? Olivia asked, pulling up a news article on her tablet. Richard Davenport, once Chicago's real estate king, was making headlines again. After serving 8 years of his 20-year sentence, he had been denied parole for the 3rd time. The article detailed his continued attempts to claim reformation while evidence suggested he was still trying to manipulate the system. Some people never change, Mark observed, no trace of the old anger in his voice. Time and success had mellowed his feelings about the past into something closer to pity. His phone buzzed, a text from Harrison Blake, now retired but still serving as a consultant for major projects. The older man had weathered the Davenport scandal unscathed, his reputation even enhanced by his firm's role in exposing corruption. Lunch tomorrow? Harrison's text read, "Need your advice on the architecture school scholarship program?" The Harrison Blake Scholarship for Ethical Architecture had become one of the most prestigious awards in the field, funding students who demonstrated both talent and strong moral principles. Mark served on the selection committee, turning his experience into a force for positive change. "Tell him yes," Olivia said, reading over his shoulder. "But remind him he's speaking at the sustainability conference next week. And he still owes us that interview for the book." The book, Building Better, Architecture as Social Change, was their latest project, part memoir, part manifesto. It told the story of how personal tragedy had led to professional revolution. Mark had initially resisted the idea, but Olivia had convinced him that their journey could inspire others. A notification popped up on his calendar. Annual Santorini trip, 2 weeks. Every year, Mark and Olivia spent a month at Eleni's Taverna, helping with renovations and mentoring young architects in sustainable design principles. The Taverna had become a unique learning center, combining traditional wisdom with modern innovation. Eleni, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, had expanded her influence far beyond her small corner of Santorini. Her philosophy of rebuilding lives through community had inspired similar projects across Greece. The Taverna's wall now displayed photos of successful protégés alongside the old family pictures. "Did you see this?" Olivia handed him another tablet, showing a social media post. It was from Tiffany, now Tiffany Martinez, living in Seattle with her husband, a high school teacher. The post showed her speaking at a conference, breaking the cycle, confronting privilege and finding purpose. After the scandal, she had undergone a genuine transformation. Her testimony against Richard had been just the beginning. She now worked with at-risk youth, using her experience to show how toxic social environments could corrupt young lives. Mark had seen her once, 5 years ago, at a sustainable architecture conference in Vancouver. Their interaction had been brief but significant. "I'll never expect forgiveness," she had said, "but I want you to know what you did, exposing all of us. It saved me. Forced me to face who I was and decide who I wanted to be." Her old social circle had scattered to the winds. Sandra Mitchell had lost everything in her divorce, eventually finding work as a real estate agent in Phoenix. Rebecca Chun had rebuilt her life in Hong Kong, running a small but legitimate tech consulting firm. James Porter had surprised everyone by becoming a substance abuse counselor, his own experiences with addiction and enablement fueling his desire to help others. Cassandra, protected by her new identity, had built a successful career in corporate compliance on the West Coast. She occasionally sent anonymous tips about potential corruption, continuing her role in maintaining ethical business practices. Julia Chen, whose reporting had blown the scandal wide open, had won a Pulitzer and now ran her own investigative journalism nonprofit. Her organization specialized in exposing corporate corruption and environmental crimes, with Mark and Olivia serving on the board of directors. "The Athens project team is waiting for our call," Olivia reminded him, checking her watch. Their latest venture, transforming an abandoned industrial district into a sustainable community hub, was their most ambitious yet. The project combined everything they had learned over the past decade: environmental restoration, community engagement, social responsibility. The design incorporated elements inspired by Eleni's Taverna, spaces that encouraged connection, healing, and growth. "Did you finish the impact report for the Chicago project?" Mark asked, gathering his materials for the call. "Better." Olivia grinned. "I got us full funding. The city council voted unanimously this morning. We can break ground on the affordable housing complex next month." The project was personal for both of them. Located in one of Chicago's underserved neighborhoods, it would provide not just housing but educational facilities, job training centers, and green spaces. They had named it the Phoenix Complex, a symbol of renewal and rebirth. Their conference room wall displayed photos of completed projects: a community center in Detroit built from recycled materials, a solar-powered school in rural India, a vertical farm in urban Brazil. Each building told a story of transformation, of turning destruction into creation. "Sometimes I wonder," Olivia said as they prepared for the call, "what would have happened if Tiffany hadn't betrayed you in Santorini? Would you have become this version of yourself?" Mark thought about it. The betrayal had changed him, certainly. But the real transformation had come from his choices afterward, choices influenced by Eleni's wisdom, Harrison's mentorship, and eventually, Olivia's partnership. "I think we build ourselves from our experiences," he said finally. "The question is whether we build walls or bridges." Their conversation was interrupted by another call, the director of the youth program they had established. 20 teenagers from challenging backgrounds, learning about architecture and environmental science while rebuilding their own communities. "Mr. Oberon?" The students finished their first design project. "They want to present it to you and Mrs. Chun personally." Mark smiled, remembering his own journey from angry young architect to mentor and builder. "Tell them we'll be there tomorrow morning." That evening, as they walked home along Lake Michigan, Mark reflected on the decade since his revenge plot had transformed into something greater. The anger that had once driven him had been replaced by purpose. The desire for destruction had become a mission to create. Their penthouse, unlike his old apartment, was warm and lived in. Photos from their global projects mixed with personal memories. Their wedding in Santorini, Eleni officiating. The opening of their first sustainable housing project, the day they received the UN Environmental Award. A framed article hung in Mark's study, From Scandal to Salvation. How the Davenport Case Changed Chicago's Architecture. Next to it was a simple worry bead mounted in a glass case. Eleni's gift, now a reminder of choices made and lessons learned. The Athens team sent over the latest soil reports. Olivia called from her home office. "The contamination levels are higher than expected, but nothing we haven't handled before." Mark joined her, studying the reports. They had become experts in transforming damaged spaces, environmental and social, into sources of renewal. Each project was a chance to prove that destruction didn't have to be the end of the story. Their phone system chimed with an incoming video call. Eleni's face appeared on the screen, the taverna visible behind her. "You're still coming next month?" she asked without preamble. "The new students are eager to meet the famous Mark Oberon." "Famous?" Mark laughed. "For what?" "For showing them that revenge isn't the only way to deal with betrayal." Eleni's eyes twinkled. "Though I hear Richard Davenport might disagree." They chatted about the taverna's latest renovations, the success of past students, plans for expanding the training program. Eleni had become more than a mentor. She was family, her influence extending far beyond that crucial moment in Santorini. After ending the call, Mark and Olivia stepped onto their balcony. Chicago stretched before them, a city they were helping reshape one building at a time. The Oberon Community Center glowed in the distance, its solar panels catching the last rays of sunlight. "We should visit Richard," Olivia said suddenly. "Show him what his actions led to. Not the revenge part, the rebuilding part." Mark considered it. A decade ago, such a suggestion would have seemed impossible. But now? Maybe. It might help him understand that destruction isn't the only way to have power. Their evening was interrupted by an urgent email from Julia Chan. Another corporate scandal was brewing. A developer cutting corners on safety regulations, endangering communities for profit. "Here we go again," Olivia sighed. But her eyes were bright with purpose. Mark nodded, already pulling up their research resources. They had built systems for exposing corruption while promoting ethical alternatives. Each case was a chance to prevent what had happened with Richard from happening again. Later that night, reviewing plans for their next project, Mark found himself thinking about the young architect who had once dreamed of changing the world through sustainable design. That dream hadn't died in Santorini. It had evolved, becoming stronger and more focused. The betrayal that could have destroyed him had instead sparked a revolution in how he approached both architecture and life. Each building they designed wasn't just a structure. It was a statement about resilience, renewal, and the power of choosing creation over destruction. His phone buzzed with a message from one of their youth program graduates, now studying architecture at MIT on a Harrison Blake scholarship. The student had attached photos of his first design project, a community center for troubled teens. "You taught me that buildings can heal," the message read. "I want to continue that legacy." Mark showed the message to Olivia, who was reviewing applications for their next community project. "This is the real victory," he said. "Not bringing down Richard, but building up others." She squeezed his hand, understanding. Their work had become about more than architecture or revenge or even sustainability. It was about transformation, of spaces, of communities, of lives. The Chicago night skyline glittered beyond their window, each light representing a story, a possibility, a chance for change. Mark thought of all the players in his own story. Tiffany finding redemption and helping others, Richard facing the consequences of his choices, Harrison turning his influence toward positive change, Eleni continuing to guide lost souls toward renewal. They had all been changed by the events of that summer in Santorini. But change, as Mark had learned, was just the beginning. What mattered was what you built from it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, environmental battles to fight, communities to support, students to mentor. But Mark and Olivia were ready. They had built something stronger than revenge. They had built a legacy of transformation. As they prepared for bed, Mark's phone buzzed one last time. A message from Harrison. Just interviewed a promising scholarship candidate. Reminds me of you, 10 years ago. Angry but driven. Think you might want to meet him. Mark smiled, remembering his own journey from anger to purpose. Set up the meeting, he replied. Some stories need to come full circle. The night settled over Chicago, but in offices and homes across the city, the impact of Mark's choices continued to ripple outward. The game of revenge had ended long ago. The work of rebuilding, of transforming pain into purpose, destruction into creation, would continue. And in a small taverna in Santorini, Eleni still told the story of the angry young architect who had learned to build something greater than vengeance. It was a story that never failed to inspire those who heard it, a reminder that even the darkest betrayal could lead to the brightest future, if you chose to build rather than destroy. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.